Today, we're going to talk about Lockout Tag Out. You might be asking yourself, what is Lockout Tag Out? Or you might have worked here for years and Lockout Tag Out is second nature. So let's start from the beginning. Lockout Tag Out, or Lotto, is the practice of isolating all energy sources and then controlling those energy sources with a physical lock. That way no one else can turn the power back on or release an energy source because you have your personal lock on the equipment, or you have your personal lock on a group lockbox that has the equipment locked out. Now we'll talk about that more in a minute, but thank you for joining us for Lockout Tag Out training.
An authorized person is a person who locks out or tags out machines or equipment in order to perform servicing or maintenance. Authorized employees are the only ones who can apply and remove lockout tagout devices. Lockout tagout procedures must be completed by the authorized employee who will be performing the servicing or maintenance. Authorized employees must be trained on recognition of applicable hazardous energy sources, the type and magnitude of the energy available in the workplace, the methods and means necessary for energy isolation and control. Affected employees are employees whose job requires them to operate or use a machine or equipment on which servicing or maintenance is being performed under lockout or tagout. If they work in an area where servicing or maintenance is being performed, they are also considered an affected employee. Affected employees may not apply or remove lockout tagout devices. They may not help or perform service or maintenance on locked out devices. If they need to assist with the work, they become authorized employees and must be trained as such. Affected employees must be trained on the purpose and use of the energy control procedure. Other employees work in areas where lockout tagout occurs but do not work on or near the equipment. Other employees must be informed of lockout tagout procedures and must know not to attempt to start any locked or tagged out equipment.
All right, today we're going to talk about Lockout Tag Out and the importance of following Lockout Tag Out every time we do something. Now, we're not just going to stay here in this room. We're going to get out there in the field and do some live action Lockout Tag Out. But first, before we do anything, we want to prepare for our lockout. So what does that mean? We want to check and see if we have a lockout procedure for the job we're going to do. That's very important. And if we don't have a procedure, we need to get one made by getting with the safety lead and the department leads together to form a lockout tagout procedure. Let's say for this instance that we do have a lockout tagout procedure, and let's go ahead and go through our process. So before I do any work, I want to make sure I got the proper Rockwell lockout tagout procedure so I can do the job correctly. I'll print it out of the S drive, and we'll go look at that in just a little bit. But I'll print it out and make sure it looks correct. And if everything's good, then I can go to my next step. And that's making sure that I have all the devices I need to lock it out. That could be a valve cover lockout like this that goes over top of the valve and puts the lock on there. But I want to make sure I have this before I even go out there to do the job so that I have all the tools I need. I need to make sure I have a very important thing, which is my personal lock with my picture ID on it. Why is that important? Because we need to know who's locking things out, who's safe to work on it at all times. So your picture ID makes it very easy for anyone to walk up to the equipment, identify you, know that you're good and safe to work on it, and know that you have your lock on the equipment properly. Let's take a closer look at our lockout tagout tag and everything that needs to be on them. You should have a laminated lockout tag with your picture ID on it. If you don't already have one, get with your department lead so one can be made for you. On the tag, you should also have your name and your department where you work. On the back side, you want to have your phone number written clearly. So if you leave your lock on something or somebody just needs to get a hold of you for some reason, they know who has it locked out and they can get a hold of you when needed. Now look, another important thing with lockout is when you're done with the job, you need to take your personal lock off of the equipment. If you forget, guess who we're going to be calling back down here? That's right, you. So don't forget to take off your lock. It's very important, and it's a big deal to cut someone's lock off, and we never want to cut somebody's lock off down here. All right, so let's go out in the field. But first, we need all of our safety equipment. So let's look at the 6 steps of a successful lockout tag out. Step number 1, you're going to plan and prepare. That's where you're going to look at the equipment that you're working on, get your lockout procedure, make sure you have all the proper devices and locks that you need, make sure you're knowledgeable on how to perform that lockout. If you need help, get help. Step number 2 is you shut down the equipment like you normally would. So that'd be your normal on-off power switch at the equipment. Step number 3, isolate all energy sources. That's where you go to the disconnect or the air supply or whatever the energy source may be, and you turn it off or valve it out at the energy source. Now, step 4 is when you finally apply the lockout lock to all the isolated energy sources that you've turned off or valved out. Then you want to release that stored energy. If there's any stored energy between the lockout and your equipment that you're working on, you have to release that. So releasing stored energy is vitally important. Residual stored energy must be removed. Capacitors, batteries, coils, accumulators, piping systems are all just a few examples of possible stored energy. In this example, the stored energy could be the liquid between the lockout point and the pump. That stored energy must be released before doing any work. So imagine like an airline that has air trapped in it. That's still energy ready to go. You need to release that air before you start working. And then the last, and some would say the most important step of a lockout tag out is to attempt to start the equipment. That's going to verify and make sure that your lockout is good. So here are the 6 steps. You got your running equipment going, and you want to go to step number 1, which is preparing. So you prepare for the shutdown, you got your lockout form, you got your locks, you're ready to go. Now step number 2, you can stop the equipment like you normally would. You hit that stop button. The equipment stopped. Now you can isolate the equipment at the source. So you're going to that disconnect, you're going to that valve that supplies whatever the energy is that you're locking out. Then step number 4, you can apply the lockout locks to that equipment and ensure that they won't start up. In step number 5, you're going to go back and release that stored energy if there's any trapped between the isolation point and your equipment. Remember, think about that airline or hydraulic fluid or any other energy source that could be trapped between the isolation point and the equipment. Then step number 6, that very important step, is you go back and attempt to start your equipment and make sure that it won't start. And that's the 6 steps of lockout. You need to memorize these and know these when you're out in the field. Now let's take a look at some potential energy sources.
Electrical, mechanical, chemical, hydraulic, pneumatic, thermal, steam, gravity,
Now you might even be asking yourself, when do I even need the lockout equipment? Well, that's easy. Anytime there's a potential energy source. Now that could be a lot of different things. Electricity, thermal, pneumatic, chemical, gravity. There's a lot of different energy sources that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But let's take this equipment for instance. This equipment runs heavy paper across it all day long. Now these are thousands of pounds. It would have no problem causing major injury to you. So what do I need to do if I need to work on it? Well, first, I need to identify all the potential energy sources. And that can be done with a lockout procedure. Now, if you don't have a lockout procedure for a piece of equipment that you need to work on, that's a stopping point. Stop right there, get with your department lead, get with the safety lead, and let's figure it out. And we'll get a procedure made. So if you need to do mechanical work on this equipment, you'll need to do a full lockout and de-energize, isolate all the energy sources, apply your lock so that you can do good, safe work. Now, is there any way to temporarily interrupt the energy source so I can do some routine tasks like changing stretch wrap? Yeah, there is. We have a key system, and I'll show you what that looks like. Now, when you use a key system, that's for normal, routine, production-related tasks, such as changing out plastic wrap on a wrapping machine. It's something you have to do every single day. It's a minimum interruption. You're not doing mechanical work. You're just changing out a routine task. So this key switch right here is an example of controlling the energy temporarily so you can do normal routine tasks like changing out the stretch wrap. You'll take this key out, it shuts the equipment down temporarily. You keep that key on your person so you can do the normal routine task of changing out stretch wrap. Now, if I wanted to go in here and work on this piece of equipment, this is no longer good. I'll need to do a lockout, tag out on this equipment because doing mechanical work is not normal, routine production task. All right, let's go. So when I do a lockout, tag out, what are the characteristics of my lock that are required by OSHA? Well, OSHA says that we have to abide by one of these three characteristics: size, shape, or color for a lockout, tag out lock. Now, do you know which one we chose? That's right, color. That's why you'll notice all of our lockout locks are red. Any lockout lock should be a red lock. That identifies it as a lockout lock. Now, red locks should not be used for anything else. That includes your locker, your lunchbox, a door, anything that's not lockout, tag out should not have a red lock. Red locks are for lockout, tag out only, okay? Now, once I got my red lock, I'm also required to have an ID, a picture ID with my name and my department that I work in on it. So I have my lock here, I have my picture ID, my department, and my name on my lockout ID. I also added my phone number on the back. So if my lock's on a piece of equipment and someone needs to get a hold of me, they can easily reach me by my phone number written clearly on the back. So this is the lockout room in Mill 2. We want to print out a lockout. I'll just turn the computer on, log in with the password lockout. And now on the display, you'll see where you can do confined spaces, you can do pre-hazards, you can do your yard access, you can look at SCSs, you can do your roof access, but we're looking for lockouts. So I'll double click on the lock. It says Greif Finalized Lockouts. I'll choose if I'm doing CFB, converting, Mill 1 or Mill 2. Let's just say I'm doing converting. Double click on the one I need, and my lockout will pop up right here in front of me. And then I can either right click and press print, or go up here to the top little three dots in the top right of the screen, click it, and click print. It'll pull up my printer. It should already be hooked up to where it needs to be, and click print. And now my lockout should come out on the printer. And just like that, we accessed our lockout and we printed out our lockout procedure. So this is a very important step. Then we can go on and do all the things we need to do with lockout. In addition to that, in the lockout room, we have some different devices that you might have to use to perform a lockout. In step 2, you shut down the equipment like you normally would. At the control panel, you may just hit a stop or off button. Alright, so now we're out here at a disconnect. Now this disconnect is not actually hooked up. So we're just going to use this for demonstration purposes. Now what do we need to do before we ever mess with disconnect, powering it on or off? That's right, we need to have our arc flash suit on. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we're ready to safely throw out a disconnect. So let's treat this disconnect as if it's live. So what do I need to do to safely throw out this disconnect? Well, first I'm going to use my left hand and try not to reach across the live bucket that I'm turning on or off. I'm going to turn away my face and body, close my eyes, take a deep breath and hold it, and then throw the disconnect. Let's walk through some of those steps that I did when I was in the arc flash suit and why we did them. So step number 1 is I use my left hand, or whichever hand doesn't have to reach across a bucket is what I want to try to do. So I use my left hand, I'll reach out as far as I can and keep my body away from the disconnect. And then I'm going to look away, close my eyes, and I'm going to take a deep breath and hold it before I throw it in or out. Now, why do you think that I'd want to reach far away from my body before attempting to throw a disconnect in or out? That's right. I want to keep my body away and facing away in case an arc flash does occur. I'm far as away as possible. If I'm standing right in front of a disconnect and an arc flash happens, that's big trouble. If I'm standing off to the side, it's still going to be trouble, but I'm going to be out of the way as much as possible. And then I have my full arc flash suit on for my protection, but I'm also turning my head away so my face doesn't catch the blast. I'm closing my eyes so I'm not blinded by the flash, and then I'm holding my breath. Why do you think I take a deep breath and hold it before I throw a disconnect in or out? Yeah, you guessed it. Because when an explosion happens, what's the first thing you do? You take a deep breath of air. But if I already have a deep breath of air, instead of inhaling all the fumes and hot flames and possibly vaporized copper, I'm going to exhale, which is going to prevent me from inhaling all that damaging material. Sound good? All right, let's move on. So now that we got the power off, now we can safely apply our lock to the powered off equipment. When I'm locking multiple things out, I can A, use multiple locks with my picture ID on each thing that I'm locking out, or B, I can use generic red lockouts, lock out my group, and then put that key in the group lockbox. We'll talk about that in a minute. But for now, let's just show the lockout process. All right, so we got it off. We had our suit on, everything's off. Make sure it remains in the off position. Slide the lock on there, remove the key, and now we have our lock on this piece of equipment, and it can't power up from here. But we have a few other steps before we have a successful lockout completion. As soon as I apply the lock on the piece of equipment, it's important that I go through my lockout procedure and sign off that that lock has been applied when it's been applied. So this lock has been applied. If there's a lock number, I'll put the lock number on there. If not, I'll just put my initials in there. I'll apply my initials, and that lock is good. And I'll do that for every lock that I apply in the procedure. After I apply it, I'll check it, make sure it's secured, and then sign off that lock was applied in that step. All right, let's keep going. All right, now that we have our energy sources locked out, so again, you want to make sure you have all your potential energy sources locked out. That's electrical, thermal, hydraulic, pneumatic, gravity, and chemical. So make sure you have all potential energy sources completely locked out. Then you release any stored energy. So you're not keeping, let's say you have an airline and you turn off the airline and you trapped air inside that line. That's a potential energy source that needs to be released. So you want to make sure you did all that. Once you've controlled all the energy sources with your locks, now what do? Then you may want to use a lock box. You'll open your lock box. You'll take all of the keys and put them inside that lock box. Close the lock box. Then you'll take your personal lockout lock and apply it to the lock box. Now, there's no way to get inside to get that key without me taking my personal lock off. So now what I'll do if multiple people need to work on that piece of equipment? Well, again, I'm glad you asked. Anyone else who needs to work on that piece of equipment can add their lock to this lock box, and now they are covered in that lockout because there's no way to get to that key unless every person's lock is taken off from the lock box. All right, so once I have the equipment locked out, I can put all the keys, or it might just be one key that goes to multiple locks for a group lockout. I'll put the key or keys in the group lock box. Now I can take my lock, which is good for me and keeps me safe, and I'll apply it to the group lock box. Now let's say that someone else needs to be involved in this work with me. What do you think they need to do? That's right. They need to add their lock to the lock box so that they can do work. So Anthony, if you want to do some work with me on this equipment, you need to add your lock to the lock box. Now Anthony has his personal lock with his picture ID on it, and he just applied his lock to that group lock box. We can't get in there unless both of our locks are off. So now Anthony is able to do work with me on that equipment. And now let's say I'm done working, so I can take my lock off and I go home. Anthony is still covered in the lockout because there's no way to get that key until Anthony takes his personal lock off of the lock box. Now, one thing Anthony needs to remember is that when it's time to go home, he better get his lock off that lock box, or we're going to be giving him a call back and I'll have to come back down here to get his lock off. So Anthony, you want to go ahead and, if your work's done, you want to take your lock off there? Now his lock is off and he's exposed the key so the lockout can be unlocked. Now, one thing to remember is that once all the locks are off of this lock box, the lockout is no longer good because anybody could have done anything with this key while we were gone. So it's important that if we take all the locks off, the lockout is completely done. If I come back in once all the locks are off and I need to do more work, I'll have to go back and check all the locks in the procedure to make sure they're still valid before I apply my lock. Now, there is one thing that you can do if you're crossing over shifts or you need to leave a lockbox overnight and people need to take their locks off of the equipment. There's one thing you can do, and that's called a safety seal. So let's see what that looks like. I put my key inside the lockbox, and now what I'm going to do is use a safety seal. Now, what a safety seal basically is a really strong zip tie that has a specific number at the bottom of them. This one is a 0000841. So I can apply that safety seal to the locked lockbox. And make sure it's nice and tight and sealed. And I'll apply that serial number to my lockout sheet. So it's important, at the bottom of the sheet, there's a place for safety seal. I will write the number to that seal. Now, if that seal is broken, it means someone got into the lockout box. And if they put a different seal on there, it's going to be a different number. And if I come back and there's a different number than what's on my lockout sheet, I'll have to go back and check every single lock to make sure it's still good. So that safety seal is your friend if you're crossing over shifts, or you have to leave a lockbox overnight and you need to take your lock off here. So I can take my lock off this box. The only thing on this box now is the safety seal, but there's no way to get into it without cutting the safety seal. And once I cut that safety seal, the lockout is no good any longer. All right, let's say I have my personal lock and I got it locked out on a piece of equipment. I got my key and it's in my pocket and I'm gonna do some work. Now, let's say a coworker comes up, they see I have it locked out and they say, hey, Ryan, can I step in that piece of equipment real quick? I just gotta do a real fast job. It takes less than a minute. You already have it locked out. Can I just jump in there and do it? What do you think you should do? Yeah, that's right. No way, no how. Your lock is good for you and my lock is good for me, no one else. So when my lock is on a piece of equipment, that protects me so I can go in there and do work. No one else can work under my lock. They have to have their personal lock on the equipment. So what should I do? I should just tell that person politely, hold on, you need to make sure you have your lock on the lockbox or the equipment so you can come in here and do the work you need. Remember, your lock's good for you and my lock is good for me. Now let's go to work.